Do you ever feel like you're stuck in life? Like you're in the same spot you were a few years ago, and no matter what you seem to do to change your situation, you just can't do it. As if you're fighting this constant uphill battle, and it's a battle that you're losing. Because if you do, I don't think you're alone. I think that most people actually feel the exact same way that you feel, even if they don't speak about it. And so in this video, I want to do two things. Number one, I want to explain my theory on where this feeling that we all have that we're not progressing is coming from. And then number two, using evidence from your own life, I want to hopefully prove to you that you are making progress, that you are changing your life for the better. And so before we get into it, let's just make sure we're on the same page when I say that it feels like you're stuck. So it might feel like no matter how hard you try, you just can't get that promotion that you think you deserve. You just can't clear that credit card debt that you've been trying to clear. You just can't change your body and look in a mirror and actually be happy. The things that you've been putting constant effort into for months or years of your life just don't seem to change. You don't seem to be able to break out of the situation you're in right now, as though you're destined to be in this place for the rest of your life, so you may as well just give up. But of course, this idea is a trick that our brain plays on us, and we'll get into how and why in a minute. But first, let me explain where I think this comes from. And there are two main suspects here. The first is algorithms, and the second is survivorship bias. Now, algorithms, I don't need to tell you that you can swipe to any number of apps on your phone right now and see people at the absolute top of their field, which means that whatever it is that you want to do in life, whether you want to be an entrepreneur or a bodybuilder or a parent or an influencer or anything in between, all you need to do is open your phone and algorithms will show you the people who are so far ahead of you and progressing seemingly so much faster than you that you could never hope to catch up. And this skews our view of what average actually looks like. I call this the average estimation paradox. The idea that because everybody assumes that everybody else is above average, they assume that they are below average. And that belief that you're below average discourages you from ever actually beginning to change your life, because if you're in an uphill battle that you feel like you're never going to win, what's the point of starting? And so that's algorithms. But with survivorship bias, which I'll tell you about in a second, it gets even worse. So survivorship bias is this idea that we only really hear about winners in life, right? You can open the news and see the news story about the entrepreneur who sold his or her business for £100 million, but you don't hear about the 100 million entrepreneurs who went out of business and sold it for zero. We only hear about the survivors, which again skews this reality of what progress looks like. It skews our view of what other people are doing and how we compare relatively. Now, to understand why those two things together are so dangerous, you need to understand this key idea. Growth is impossible to detect in the moment, but just because you can't sense that your life is changing, your life is changing. And so if you're putting the correct inputs in, the things that you can control, the things that you can see every day, the time you wake up, the food you eat, the exercise you do, the money you save, the positive conversations you have, the relationships you build and foster. So long as you're putting enough of those things in, the changes that you can't currently detect in a few years' time will be positive. And although I understand this intellectually, I myself fall into this trap far more often than I care to admit, where I will look at my life and despite all of the effort I'm putting into every single area of it, I'll feel like I'm getting no further ahead. Like my life hasn't changed for as long as I can remember, as if my entire adult life so far has essentially been pointless, right? Because if it wasn't pointless, I would have made progress. But that all changed a few weeks ago when unexpectedly I found an old Instagram post of mine. It's this post here from the 30th of January 2015, so almost exactly 10 years ago. And it's a selfie of me with the caption, "No internet for a few days means lots of designing and lots of selfies." Now you might be wondering how a selfie of me has proven to me that life does change and that things are progressing even if it feels like they're not. But let me explain. You see, the two claims I make in that caption are true. I did have no internet and I was designing. But the true story behind that post is a little bit more complex. The reason I had no internet is because I was living at home with my parents in this cold and damp council house, and my dad was ill with Alzheimer's, but he hadn't yet been diagnosed, which means that he was unwell and couldn't work, so was earning no money. And my mum was staying off work to care for my dad, which means that she was earning no money. And because he hadn't yet been diagnosed, there was no financial support, there was no formal assistance. The household was bringing in nothing. And then there was me, a lost and confused 19-year-old who, if I'm really honest, was fairly useless in that situation. And I don't think I'm being unfair calling myself useless, because I didn't have a job and I was attempting to grow a business, and at the time it was making absolutely no money. And so the second part of that caption, that I was designing, was true, but I wasn't really being paid for the design. I was using some weird freelancing website where you'd kind of create a design against a brief, and then you would be up against, say, 20 other designers, and if you happened to be the best designer of the bunch and the client happened to push down the price enough, you would eventually get paid. And so during that week when we had no internet, we also had basically no food in the house. The gas and the electric meters were on emergency. We had no money. I had no way of getting out of it. And thankfully I won one of those design projects and I got, I think it was £80, which allowed me to pay the internet and get a little bit of food and try and feed us for a few days whilst I put some money on the gas and put some money on the electric. But the reality was, almost exactly a decade ago to the day, my life was really not good. I was this spotty, underweight, unconfident, useless guy who did not know himself, who did not know where he was going. And regardless of what was going on in my mind, in my physical environment, things were not good. I couldn't support my family. Our house was cold. We had no money to pay the bills. We could hardly feed ourselves. And now, of course, 10 years later, despite the fact that it doesn't feel in any way like anything has changed over that time, I can't point to an exact day where I'm like, it was that day there when my life got better. It was that favor there that somebody did for me that improved my life. It was that decision I took that transformed it all. I can't point to any single period over the past 10 years where I have been able to detect progress, where I have been able to detect growth, and yet evidently things are fortunately very different right now. I'm recording this on a fancy camera in my own office with my own business, with clients around the world, with trips to New York and a speaking engagement in Paris early next year that's going to pay me more for half an hour of my time than I've ever been paid for half an hour of my time. I've got all of the possessions I could ever really care for. I've got a nice car, I can pay my bills, I have some sort of financial stability, and yet I can't tell you a single day when my life changed. And for the entirety of the past decade, I've had this sense that things aren't changing. I've had this sense that my life is not progressing, that I'm fighting and losing that uphill battle that I spoke about. And yet that Instagram post proved me wrong. That Instagram post provided the perspective and allowed me to zoom out far enough to take a broad enough look at my life to realize that growth and change are always happening. And despite the fact that they're not detectable, that undercurrent is always flowing in your life. And so for you, that means two things. Number one, it means that you already have all of the evidence you need to foster a belief that your life is changing for the better. If you look at where your life is now, relative to 10 years ago, in any way you can. If you can find an Instagram post, fantastic. If not, just think about all the ways you've changed. Maybe you earn more money now. Maybe you're more confident. Maybe you've found a life partner or purchased a house or got the job you like, or maybe you've just had incredible experiences over the past 10 years that have turned you into the person you are today. When you zoom out far enough, you realize that your life does change, but it grinds incredibly slowly. And yet when you have that broad view, you have the evidence that if your life can change that much in a decade when you didn't even notice it, imagine how much it can change in the next decade now you do. Which leads me on to the second key takeaway from this idea, which is that because you can now see that your life is changing and is progressing, it's more important than ever that you're putting in the correct inputs, those positive daily actions that we spoke about, that are proven to change your life, that are going to show up in years to come when you least expect it, because you've been doing the right things for long enough. You need to be making sure that you're doing those, because it is not pointless. You are not losing that battle. Your life is changing. And so everything you do today and next month and next year will have an impact, whether it's positive or negative. And so a future version of you is hoping, is wishing more than anything else that the second you finished watching this video, you either started or continued to make the right decisions. That future version of you is relying on you. And that past version of you who didn't have it all figured out is hoping that you would be the person sat here today watching this video who could finally sort your life out. Your life is changing for the better, even if it doesn't feel like it. And so you need to keep going.